Hello, everybody, and welcome to Some Patches Required, a show where we hope to educate and entertain you on the ever-turbulent games industry. As always, I'm one of your hosts, Zach.
And I am your other host, Aaron.
And also, as always, please like and subscribe if you end up liking the episode. That's greatly appreciated. Also, if you wouldn't mind too much, share this with a friend, or as we like to say, a mortal enemy. It goes a long way. We do not care about the character of person that listens to the show. Who are we, Jesus? Absolutely not. I would never claim to be that. Ask Aaron, have I ever claimed to be that?
Only on Tuesdays.
Only on Tuesdays. And even then, it's like for 2 minutes. So you got to find me at the right time.
Yeah.
So
2-minute Tuesdays, where you claim to be Jesus for 2 minutes, despite all opposition. And you do cast judgment then during those 2 minutes, but
yeah, I mean, I typically am judging people, I think, regardless of whatever's going on. So,
well, maybe, at least you're honest.
Maybe I suck. Regardless of any of that, we love you all. You're all wonderful. We'd appreciate any way that you choose to engage with this wonderful product that we do make. Leave a comment, for example. That's also appreciated. And on the comment note, we will be talking about the Steam Machine today. So, what are your thoughts on the Steam Machine? Do you think it'll be a success, or is it going to be dead on arrival? And how much would you be willing to spend on this new gaming PC? Aaron and I are going to be running through some of our thoughts on these questions, or at least things adjacent to these questions. So we would love to know what you all think.
Yes, join us for this conversation, if you're so inclined.
If you're so inclined. Yeah, I mean, really the short of it, Aaron, it's a pretty simple story. Early November of this year, so literally just a few weeks ago, the Steam Machine, the Steam Frame, and the new Steam controller were announced from Valve, and I think it kind of sent the internet into a bit of a storm. We're going to be mainly focusing on the Steam Machine itself, but I think for both the Steam Machine and the Steam Frame, a lot of people are looking for these two hardware devices to really disrupt the existing console and VR markets. We'll see what the reality of any of that is. That's what we'll be talking about today, but there is this kind of mass desire for Valve to come in and really rip things apart, kind of disrupt the status quo.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's something that, like, it's fascinating to kind of talk about Valve in this way, because in on one hand, they are a pretty disruptive presence in the gaming space in a lot of ways, but in a lot of ways, they are also the status quo. Like, Steam has such an incredible dominance over the PC gaming market that to claim that Steam is disruptive in that space almost feels like inaccurate labeling. But yes, that is absolutely the narrative surrounding the hardware reveal, and there's a lot to unpack, especially with the Steam Machine, because it seems to be sort of towing the line between PC and console in a way that, with the surge in popularity of PC gaming, a lot of people are finding that very narratively sort of fulfilling to speculate on. And we will, as Zach has mentioned, we will get very much into that. But we had a couple just little minor thoughts on the other hardware reveals. For my part, the Steam controller, the new Steam controller, looks a lot like a controller. Kind of an ugly controller in my opinion, but I'm sure ergonomically it's quite nice, but it is a controller, and it's not a whole lot more to it than that. I doubt that's going to be the huge disruptor of the bunch.
You're just going to use the celebration sound on it looks like a controller, and it's like, mission accomplished, boys, we got him. Aaron can't say it doesn't look like a controller. Mission accomplished. Yeah, Gabe was really concerned about your review.
Target market of 1 agrees. Controller.
Yeah, it is definitely a bit of a weird looking controller. I bet it actually isn't very strange, kind of like, I don't know if ergonomics is the correct word for when you're holding something, but you get the idea. It looks weird mostly because there's not that like middle part where you normally grip onto something. So like, I don't know. It looks like it could be weird to hold because your hands just can't kind of like wrap around it as much. But in reality, it's probably fine. I bet it feels quite good.
It works for the Steam Deck as well, right? Like ergonomically on the Steam Deck, there are raised out components that sit nicely in your hand as you're holding this weird screen. So I'd have to imagine that if I haven't had fatigue playing hours on my Steam Deck, I probably won't or wouldn't on this controller. But yeah, it's a controller. Controller.
The interesting thing, I know you've, I think, got more to say about the VR headset itself. The interesting thing I'd say about the VR headset is that kind of in the same vein as, I don't want to get too much into price, but in the same vein as the Steam Machine, I think really the biggest thing that people are hoping from the VR headset is that it's like cheaper than $1,000 or candidly like close to $500. Like I said, I'll save some of the discussion here, but that's one of the things with the headset is people are super into the idea that it's going to be this like hyper performant, hyper available from at least a pricing perspective piece of hardware. And I don't think that's going to be the reality based on some conversations that I've had with people who have access to such information. So yeah, we'll see what happens with the headset itself. I've also heard some people upset about the fact that it doesn't have full color pass-through, just because some people that I guess are super into VR like the idea of chilling on their couch and watching a movie on a big flat screen TV functionally. Not really a use case that I'd be interested in, but I would also say there is a reason I do not have a VR headset yet, and maybe it's because there's not really enough use cases and or games I'm interested in to like justify buying a headset at this time.
Yeah. I think that's a fair position to take. I also completely agree. I can't fathom, and I've played around with the technology a fair amount, and I do agree that initially it is cool to have a screen as big as you want it in like a theater mode for VR, but it's not inherently a better experience watching anything like that than it is just watching it on a TV that you already own, or candidly even watching it on a phone. There's just not that much difference there for me. In terms of the VR headset, my opinion, which I will desperately attempt to keep brief, is regretfully multifaceted, and part of it comes in with the price thing, which we don't know exactly how much this is going to cost, but high performance VR headsets, which are no longer tethered to PCs, making them not inherently a peripheral device. They're not marketed necessarily as or priced like peripheral devices. They are priced like their actual value, right? And that butts up against the fact that unfortunately the market perception of these devices is largely still as peripherals. And I think that's because even though they are not peripheral devices, they tend to only really have on offer peripheral experiences. That's sort of my issue with VR as it stands right now. There aren't that many games coming out for VR that are completely unmissable experiences. You know, genre-defining, changing sort of titles that come around once in a gen. Think your Breath of the Wild, which flipped open world design on its head, right? Those games aren't coming out for VR, partially because the total addressable market for VR is still comparatively very small. To either something like console or PC gaming. So it's what I call like the Xbox Kinect effect, where you have this innovative piece of hardware that ends up getting utilized for increasingly niche experiences, because to put a budget into making something that would really sell those systems, you kind of want to already have a market there for it. And the amount of money it would take to build an experience like that out for VR, even with all of its, limitations, just, it would be too expensive to warrant it, considering how small the market is in comparison to other sorts of platforms. So, yeah, I doubt very much that the Steam Frame is going to be the VR headset that finally pushes VR into the mainstream. I think in its current form, the ship may have largely sailed on that, just like as an extant worry for people in the world. But yeah, I think it's nice that Valve is still staying in the VR game. I think it's nice that they're on standalone headsets instead of tethered headsets, and it looks like the new Vive trackers that are going to be coming out around the same time are going to be really, really cool for people who want to have those experiences in VR, right? You don't need to worry about setting up tripods with infrared trackers like back in the old days with the Vive, and the experiences themselves, I'm sure, will be much more streamlined and whatnot. But yeah, I can't see any VR headset right now coming out and being hugely disruptive. And as we'll discuss here in a moment, as we moved into the Steam Deck stuff, Valve is loath to sell their hardware at a loss. So I very much doubt that the pricing will be Christmas gift attainable for the vast majority of people. It's not going to be a whim purchase. I have a feeling that the Steam Frame will end up sort of playing to existing enthusiasts who want a better, newer version of the thing they already like.
I think I had to look this up while you were chatting, but I think, really what VR needs to do is what VHS did when it was competing against, I forgot what it was, like floppy
Betamax.
disk or something. We just really gotta revolutionize porn. Porn and war are the two things that drive innovation in this world. Pornography and war. Actually, full jokes aside, for those that didn't know, I do believe it was VHS. I do not remember what it was competing against. You may have just said it. Betamax? Okay, I thought you said it. My understanding is that Betamax was actually just better. Like, hands down, just a better way of doing, information storage or media storage than VHS. But VHS just became so involved with pornography and the distribution of pornography that it won out, which I think is wild. That being said, I don't know that VR porn is really helping at all. I mean, it's out there, it exists. I don't know that it's driving sales for anybody in any kind of meaningful way.
No,
yeah.
I mean, just to put a pin in that for a sec, not to put a pin in it, but to kind of close that idea, I think a lot of that has to do with the way that media is distributed and consumed now versus when VHS and Betamax were coming out. That was the dawn of home theater, right? That was the dawn of home media. You could own a movie that was shown in theaters. You could own episodes of a TV show that was in syndication, and bring it home and rent it from a video store. And all of these things were actually fairly new, fairly disruptive factors in a market. And into that environment came pornography, and people wanted to have porn at home because they didn't want to go to nasty theaters for it or try to find a Playboy in the woods or something. Now, on literally any device with an internet connection, you have the entire world of pornography at your fingertips at all times. It is impossible to avoid at this point. So what we're now discussing is not the preferred way of getting it too accessible, but just a different way to access it, which I think is a fairly key difference. But I appreciate your joke and your history lesson, Zachary. That was insightful and humorous. I chuckled.
See, I what I got out of that was just picturing 1980s America, some boys in some nice winter clothing and jackets talking to their parents. They're like, "Mama, I'm going to go out into the woods and find a porn magazine, a Playboy." And they're truffling, but for porn and they've got some like pervert on a leash and they're like, go find it, boy, go find the Playboy.
they've got the weird neighbor
bald,
with the
weird,
mustache.
yeah. So I don't know if this is an appropriate joke, but yeah, sniffing out the porn mags.
Yeah, well, that'd be something.
I feel like
That's
this
a
is like
Park.
a really cursed image or skit or something like that.
Yeah, it's just Stanley Tucci from like The Lovely Bones.
Oh fuck yeah! Oh god.
Oh shit!
Magical, fucking magical. So who the fuck is porn for? No,
Yeah.
Who the fuck is the Steam machine for? That is a fantastic question, Aaron. I'm glad you asked.
I did. I wasn't trying to figure out how to make a joke about how it's ironic that a format called beta, which you could find some root words in there that would make it suitable for the pornographic industry, failed in comparison to VHS. I was trying to find a way to make that joke elegantly, but instead I decided to ask that very insightful question, and you're so welcome.
I'm glad you were able to contain yourself ultimately.
Yeah, that would have been an embarrassing one to add to the audio show that we do.
Yeah, that'd be kind of awkward. So, who is this thing for? Great question, Aaron. I think I was kind of hoping to talk about pricing a little bit later, but as I'm thinking about it, I think we got to kind of talk about it now. So, we scoured the internet and, went to the intellectuals of our time to really get an idea of what this thing could potentially look like.
Well, before we hop fully into pricing, based on the intellectuals of our time and their great research, do we want to talk for like 2 seconds about what specifically the Steam machine is?
Absolutely not. No,
beans.
I mean, it's basically, for those that are unaware. Okay, actually, I will say the marketing around it is like very interesting because it's a PC. It is functionally a gaming PC with a very small form factor. I mean, we're talking about like if you're thinking in your brain about what you typically see with like a game or a PC tower, it is not that big. I don't have the specific details of how large it is, but it can't even be like a foot by a foot. Like it is a very small device that you can comfortably place in your living room, on your desk, and it plays games and is also just a computer. And that's how it's technically being marketed. But I feel like because it has that small form factor and it feels like it is something kind of for the living room space, it's hard to not think of it as a competitor to consoles. Even though Steam has been very direct in saying it will be priced like a PC, not like a console.
Yeah. Because it is a PC, yes. And I just looked it up. It is a roughly 6-inch cube.
Okay, which is crazy.
The Gabe Cube, as people are calling it.
The Gabe Cube, yeah.
Which does sound like you're saying GameCube with a stuffy nose. Yes, it does. But
look, the GameCube, not the Gabe Cube, was a fantastic console. So I
agree.
Appreciate the meme. But yeah, 6 inches by 6 inches is like crazy tiny, super small form factor. Most of it is actually basically there for heat dissipation. I believe it's like 70%, 75% of its volume is a cooling unit. So it's super quiet. Like it's just this really cool piece of tech. And it certainly is targeted at people that have a Steam library and want to play it kind of more portably, maybe on on like their TV or maybe on a monitor. But you don't have to. I don't know. It's a very weird piece of hardware in my mind because, like I said, I feel like it really markets itself into this console space, but it's not a console. I know I've made that point a few times and it's kind of rambly, but like, it's weird because people clearly thought this was going to be a console competitor.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that and I will refer back to this later when the conversation veers in a different direction, but the console comparisons are largely driven by two things. One, the form factor, right? The fact that it is a 6-inch by 6-inch by 6-inch cube that is meant to be attached to a TV or, you know, a high-def gaming monitor, much like you would a gaming PC. But, you know, not quite exactly, is of course one thing. But the other big thing is SteamOS, and specifically their big picture mode and the innovations that they've pushed forward through their work on the Steam Deck in terms of making that weird handheld gaming PC feel like a well thought out, well designed, you know, UX forward handheld console instead of a PC kind of held together with twine and tape. So SteamOS is also one of the big reasons that we're seeing this as a competitor to consoles, because that software just does such a great job of streamlining the user experience. But it isn't a console, as we've now said many times. It is 100% a PC, and to some degree, Valve wants it to be a PC. Like, they need it to be a little bit more PC than console for a variety of different reasons. So that has a huge net impact on the pricing in multiple different ways.
Yeah, I would just say too, before we completely leave the spec area of things, it can also run other OSs. It is completely capable of running Windows and other, if you wanted to put another Linux-based OS on your computer, that's also fine. But to your point, Aaron, it is natively, it is going to have SteamOS. And the interesting thing that I didn't realize about SteamOS is that it actually is more performant than Windows when it comes to maximizing frame rate on quite a few games. So Steam has really put a lot of effort into their operating system to make sure that it is the best gaming experience for PC. So that's also super cool to know. But on all of that note, it seems like this is not going to be a $500 to $600 piece of hardware.
Box. Yeah.
Yeah. It is likely based on various, what I would say, reputable sources, one of them being Linus Tech Tips, who I think actually does a very good job of, you know, analyzing the PC and like the hardware space. He suggested that it's probably going to be somewhere between $700 to $800. And the way that he landed upon this was by basically building a comparable hardware device to the Steam machine based on all the specs that would be going into the Steam machine, and then doing a comparison of like current market conditions versus like historical, and then what you could do if you were a larger company being, you know, able to buy on bulk. And so he said he felt pretty comfortable saying it was going to be in that $700 to $800 range.
Yeah. The $700 to $800 range based on their breakdown, which it's actually an interesting video. I'll see if we can try and link that in the YouTube video as well that we post. But yeah, it does seem, based on hardware pricing and all of that fun stuff, that this is going to be in the $700 to $800 range, which a lot of people are not stoked about in terms of pricing, just because in many ways, when the Steam Deck came out, it was astonishingly affordable for what it was, and that became even more apparent when competitors started releasing their versions of a Steam Deck-like machine. But considering the specs that they're talking about mashing into this tiny cube, $700 or $800 does not actually read as an egregious price to me. Especially considering, Zach, you and I were talking for like a couple of minutes before we started recording about PCs that we've both built. I built one back when I was in high school, a decade plus ago, and I spent $1,200 on it. And hardware pricing has obviously not gone down recently. So if this machine, which they're claiming is supposed to be about 6+ times more powerful than the Steam Deck, and should be capable of, doing 4K 60 FPS for a lot of games. It should be able to play the vast majority of games on Steam in general. And the hardware itself will outperform, their figure was roughly 70% of the hardware used by Steam users. If all of that is true, for that PC to cost $700 or $800, is that an expensive toy? Yeah, absolutely, that's an expensive toy. Is that in the Christmas sweet spot? No, but is that a damn affordable PC? Yeah. I'd say it's a pretty fucking affordable PC.
Yeah, I think the thing that a lot of people don't fully think about when it comes to making your own PC and why this might be a solid deal is that Valve is making sure, I mean, obviously there'll be defective product occasionally, right? Whenever you're mass producing anything, there's the possibility that something could go wrong. But if you're the one building your PC from scratch, it is way more likely to have issues. This computer that I love, that I spent like over $2,000 building or whatever, has weird issues because part of it's like the Intel processor is, I think it's like 13th gen. And so it has these issues because of Intel and whatever. It doesn't matter. But my point is like you have way more risk with compatibility issues, like having to set stuff up properly. It is not plug and play when you make your own PC. And it generally is going to be more expensive than what the Steam machine is to make your own PC. So if we're talking about like a performant, solid entry-level PC, I think that the Steam machine actually makes a ton of sense. And candidly, from my perspective, I think $700 sounds incredibly cheap for what it gets you, which is, I mean, everything just works. Like you can plug in, or not plug in, you can turn on the controller and it'll turn on your Steam machine, similar to like how if you have an Xbox or PlayStation and you turn on the controller and it turns on the machine. They're making it so it's compatible with, you know, whatever controller you want to buy on the marketplace. There's some level of customization that's easy with the Steam machine. Like you can change the faceplate. I know that's like a really minor thing, but there's all these like different features that just work with it. And you don't have to fidget with it to make sure that the games that you're playing really function on the machine either. I will say, though, to your earlier comment about 4K 60 on all games, it does sound like you may need to optimize your settings to hit 4K 60 on certain games, but it will be possible.
Yeah, I mean, and that's such a challenging benchmark for modern hardware to hit. I mean, outside of high-end PCs, obviously, but like if we're playing in something comparable to a PS5, PS5 Pro, those aren't benchmarks that system can hit reliably without sacrificing one thing in one direction or another either. And a PS5 Pro runs how much again? PS5 Pro, and I think you pulled a figure that might even be down.
Well, it's down $100 for holiday sales stuff, but normally it's $750.
Yeah, $750.
Yeah.
And that doesn't include $750 for a PS5 Pro for, let's just say, roughly comparable specs, just in terms of like what you'll actually get out of it. But you are looking at a, you know, much more restrictive ecosystem. Sony, as we've covered on this show many times, is basically the Apple of the gaming space. They love their walled garden. They love their general ecosystem, even though it's not, you know, hugely robust. It's just fairly restrictive. And yeah, so I mean, to be able to take that level of performance and just apply it to a box that is also a PC that you can do whatever the hell you want with, that has expandable storage built right into it. Yeah, I mean, the price point there might not be in the sweet spot that people were hoping for, and I wouldn't be surprised to see it come out much more expensive than $699, which I think was Linus Tech Tips final like estimate based on their demo build. I wouldn't be surprised to see it come out being more expensive than that, partially because we don't know what kind of deals Valve is going to be able to secure for the hardware to bring the cost down, and we definitely don't know, you know, what's going to happen with tariffs, for instance, and also the price of RAM in general has absolutely skyrocketed recently because of AI farms and the general state of the world that we all have to live in 2025. So those could very much impact the price, which is Bellular has argued that that's probably why Valve has been cagey about announcing the pricing alongside the actual hardware, which is set to release in vague early 2026. So we don't know exactly when we're going to figure out what the cost is. But yeah, I wouldn't be surprised for those reasons alone to see it cost considerably more. But then you also have to factor in the nature of Valve and their pricing model. Namely, they are not planning to subsidize this console or sell it at a loss, which most hardware manufacturers end up doing so that they can reap a return on higher margin accessories like controllers and hard drives and subscription services and stuff like that. So yeah, I wouldn't be surprised to see the price considerably higher than $699, $750, but at face value, it might not be mass market appealing, but it is certainly a deal at that price point if that's how it launches for PC gamers who are used to, dropping $1,500 on a GPU.
Yeah, I mean, Linus is pretty certain to the point that he said he would eat cake, which I thought was a strange, maybe it's because he somewhat expects to have to, pay up if he's wrong, but they seemed pretty comfortable saying that it was going to be somewhere between, realistically $700 to $760 dollars. I almost said thousand. It's like, my God,
$760,000.
Yeah. It's definitely going to be less than $760,000, guys. So it's completely affordable. Yeah, I think it's interesting in terms of who is it targeting. Well, actually, first, I would just want to say the reason that it's not getting subsidized, and they've been pretty upfront with this, is that with like the Steam Deck, they can be pretty comfortable that sales of the Steam Deck will go to people buying off of Steam, so they can subsidize it because people will buy into their ecosystem a little bit more. The Steam machine is literally just a computer. So like a company could just buy it as a workspace for someone and have no gaming going on it. So they can't take a loss on it in case there's some massive fill orders from companies that have no intention of playing games on it. It's really just to cover their asses if people don't end up playing on Steam using this device, because it is a real cost. They can't subsidize like PlayStation or Xbox where you're so shoehorned into the ecosystem that you're going to be giving Microsoft or Sony a bunch of money that helps compensate the fact that they're selling their console for a loss. Yeah. So that explains a little bit of that. I will say I did think it was interesting. Apparently there was a poll. This is from the Yongye video. I did not see where the poll was from, but he pulled up an article or a screenshot from a poll that had 65,000 people that were voting. And of the people that were voting, 52.7% said that they would buy the Steam Deck for $500. So, that's by far the majority of people. 30.4% said that they would buy it if it was $800. I think there's a pretty strong chance this thing comes in at about $800, if not a little bit cheaper. And 30% of this larger poll, like, I think that's kind of statistically relevant in my very limited understanding of statistics. I think there's a big market this could service, even if it comes in at $800. Like, even if it's not this major disruptive force for the console space, like, I do think there will be people that are excited to get it. And to answer our original question of who is this thing for, I think it's for people that are trying to get into PC gaming, but they don't have over $1,000 to spend on a custom build, or maybe they just want something that works. They're more comfortable with the console. I think this is a very solid between point between a console and a PC, because everything just kind of works like a console, but it's a PC. And I think the other thing is that those people that are looking at the super high-end consoles, we're talking like the PlayStation 5 Pro or the 2 terabyte special edition Xbox Series X that's out. That thing's $800 for a 2 terabyte console. I mean, even the PlayStation 5 Pro is a ridiculous price. Like, I don't know. It depends on what kind of games you want to play, but ultimately I could see those people justifying getting a cheaper PC that's just going to work for gaming, potentially.
Yeah. I agree. I think to close out the idea of like who is it for, it's for the $800 crowd, right? And possibly even slightly north of that, by which I don't mean rich people. I mean people who look at that price point for what's on offer and see value, right? It is for slightly more affluent PC gamers who want the plug and play ability for bringing their PC gaming to their TV with more horsepower than the Steam Deck can provide. It's also for people looking to break into PC gaming, like you said, Zach, but that don't want to spend north of $1,000 unless this thing comes out and it's $999, which it could be. You know, in which case, you know, the point still stands. The people who are looking at that and seeing it as a value to not have to worry about finding a GPU and figuring out all of the complexities that go into building a PC, and then the eccentricities that come out of using a PC that you yourself have built, all of those things, right? It is for people who want the convenience of a console packed into a reasonably powerful but still largely entry-level PC. I do think that there is a big market for people like that. I don't think that it's PS5 big, but I do think that it's sizable. It's certainly sizable enough that Valve's willing to make the investment in the first place.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that goes really well into our kind of closing section that we wanted to do, which is, will the Steam machine succeed? Which I think is such a funny question when you look at all of the information that we have, at least we have, Aaron, and we will share with all of you, our wonderful guests, because success is such a like arbitrary term.
Oh, yeah.
Because, so what is the number for the number of Steam Decks that sold? I believe I said it was 4 million.
Yeah, it's about 4 million.
This February of this year, so February of 2025, there was an estimated 4 million sales of the Steam Deck. For context, there is a chart that we found in the Linus Tech Tip video. Aaron, how many millions of copies of a PlayStation 2 were sold, which I believe is the highest selling console of all time?
Yes, correct. The answer is about 160 million.
What about the Nintendo Switch?
Nintendo Switch just shy of 160 million in the 154 range.
My point with all of this is that I don't think Valve is going to plan on hitting those kind of sales numbers. Obviously, that would be a crazy amount of success. But if Valve thinks that 4 million units of the Steam Deck being sold as of 2025 is successful, I think they're going to be completely fine with sales with the Steam machine. Another important point from that chart is that the Wii U, which is a like massive failure of a console, sold 13.6 million units. I think they're going to do just fine.
Yeah,
like
the fucking Vita, which is a punchline for having sold 5 units in America, sold 12 million. Like, yeah, they're going to be comfortable with success on the scale of the Steam Deck in the 4 to 5 million range in its first handful of years. I think that because of the way that they're not subsidizing the console as well, all of the units sold, they're not necessarily relying on recurring revenue from other sources so much as they are just making money on every unit sold. So that's a net win. And then you have to also factor in, and this is just my opinion, that the Steam Deck, even if it only sold 4 million units, was a brilliant proof of concept for SteamOS. It got SteamOS into people's hands, proved that SteamOS was capable of running games, running them well, and was just an appealing operating system to begin with, so much so that other competitors started implementing SteamOS onto their hardware once those started releasing, meaning that as the larger hardware ecosystem grew outside of Valve-manufactured hardware, they're still winning on the software side. So even if they only sell 5 million units in their lifetime, if the machine itself is successful enough to draw industry attention, other PC manufacturers may try to do similar things, much like with the ROG Ally and the Lenovo Legion Go and those sorts of machines. if SteamOS becomes the go-to operating system for console-like PC play, that's more profitable to Valve than selling 160 million units of this thing. At that point, the hardware sales are largely immaterial because they continue to own the software side and, more importantly, the sales ecosystem by driving everybody through Steam.
I think another big positive of this, and it is kind of funny because obviously Steam has a few things that people can game on now hardware-wise, or will have a few things with the Steam Deck and all the different versions of the Steam Deck. And well, I guess the different versions of the Steam Deck, it's actually the same specs. I think it's just, do I have an OLED screen or do I not? Or do I have, more or less storage? But regardless, I do think it's a good thing for developers for there to be kind of a baseline PC target with the Steam machine. One of the big negatives that Microsoft has run into with having the Xbox Series X and the Xbox Series S is that people have to target two separate build targets for two very differently powered machines. And generally speaking, developers do not like that. For those that don't know, one of the biggest reasons that there are optimization issues with a lot of PC games, especially on ports from console games, is that there are so many different iterations of what someone's computer can look like because so many computers are custom and there are so many different manufacturers. It's incredibly difficult to test for every single use case. Not just that, but you also have to determine what is the oldest build that you want to be supporting. And when I say build, I mean like components from a PC, right? This is a really big thing with mobile games where they're like, okay, what is the oldest version of an Apple phone that we're going to be willing to support? Because the older the version you want to support is, the more you have to optimize or potentially cut certain ideas because you can't run it on old hardware. So having a more standardized PC build to focus on, I don't think that's a bad thing for developers if the Steam machine really picks up momentum. I think that's super cool. Hopefully it leads to some, solid performance from games. But the short of it is, Aaron and I don't think this thing needs to sell a ton of units in order to be considered a success by Valve. I think that's why they're not subsidizing this thing. They're trying to just make it a stable revenue stream regardless of how many of them that they sell.
Gabe needs another yacht.
Yeah, with a submarine compartment or something crazy. I don't know. I will say, I think it's wild that, and of course, as I say, I think it's wild. I think I was really distracted by the yacht comment.
If you guys if you're listening to this and you're not aware of Gaben's new yacht, search Gabe Newell yacht and just look at this fucking thing. It's a behemoth.
Gabe is such an interesting human, and I mean that mostly in a loving way. We were going through this process. I found some footage of him delivering Steam Decks to people's homes as part of like a PR thing, and it was just very strange because Gabe kind of looks like Santa Claus in a way. I don't know. It was a interesting vibe.
He does have Santacular vibes. I will say.
Santacular vibes.
Yeah, that's the word I'm going with.
I remember what I was going to say. It was that with the unit sales, I think this is a good transition into the headwinds that they're going to face to success, which there are a few. One of them being that they do not have a robust distribution strategy for the Steam machine. Part of that is probably to help keep the cost down because they don't want to have to share any of the margin with resellers, which would put a markup on whatever they're trying to sell a device for. The negative of that is they do not have the same scale as PlayStation, Microsoft, Nintendo when it comes to distribution. These will not be in Target. They will not be in Walmart. They won't be at other distributors.
They won't be on Amazon.
They won't be on Amazon. You will have to buy them directly from Valve. And Valve just has limited distribution and production capabilities when compared to pretty much everyone else that's making stuff.
I mean, if the demand for this thing right out of the gate was as high as it was for the PS5 when the PS5 launched, and there was that crazy chip shortage, and there was a minor illness spreading around a handful of select countries. If that level of demand was there for the Steam machine on day one, I have a feeling that the PS5 shortage would look like a bountiful table filled with all of the finest meats and cheeses in comparison. Because of that, limited distribution and manufacturing capability. And I think the fact that they're going that route with it alone means that they're just not planning on it being that big of a release. Not to say that they can't, amp it up as time goes, but there will always be a bottleneck when the only place something is available is the OEM website. Except for the aftermarket, of course, and that's always going to be a thing, but like that's secondary market stuff, not relevant to Valve's bottom line at launch.
Well, I think we can pretty comfortably say this is not my idea. I brought this up to Aaron. This is from the Linus Tech Tip video. Linus talks about the fact that he doesn't even think Steam expects to sell 10 million copies of this thing quickly because they're not doing a custom system on chip deal with AMD. The reason he's kind of thinking through this process in that way is that part of the reason Xbox stopped their handheld production or like R&D investment was because AMD needed them to commit to a minimum of 10 million units sold to justify them working on a custom chip for their hardware. And so Linus's thought is, well, Steam would probably end up getting a better form factor and like better performance if they did a custom SoC, but they're not doing that. So it probably means that they aren't thinking they're going to sell enough units quickly enough to justify doing some of these custom components. So that was kind of an interesting thing to find out. All of this to say, they don't have the means to distribute these things in mass to the same degree as other people. And I think that's fine because it's a private company. And I think their idea of success is a little bit different. Talking about the headwinds though, Aaron, one that you brought up to me before I read it in an article were some of the interesting things when it comes to kernel level anti-cheat. If you want to elaborate on some of that.
Yes, I would be happy to. This was going to be my next major point in terms of, in essence, the question is, is the framing of the Steam machine as a console killer inaccurate or just sort of like, maybe naively, maybe just naive a little bit. And one of the reasons that I believe it is, naively optimistic is the issues that Valve with their Steam OS and everything, and Linux in general, still have with kernel level anti-cheat, which is a system that is implemented into many popular games, designed to obviously stop cheating from becoming a huge rampant issue that can completely demolish a game's community economy and just erode the player base to the point where it's non-existent. You see kernel level anti-cheat installed on many games like Call of Duty, Battlefield, basically anything, massive multiplayer games, and various, I think Fortnite possibly also has kernel level anti-cheat. And that means at a very foundational level, the games basically just don't run on Linux because Linux and kernel level anti-cheat don't like to play nice together, which means that in terms of trying to push the Steam machine as a console killer, you are now relying on people being willing to take the box, bring it home, partition the drive, and throw Windows onto half of it just to be able to play Call of Duty, which is a system seller. Call of Duty is routinely the highest selling game in any given year, even when they release some dog shit, apparently, like Black Ops 7. People are still buying these games en masse, right? And they are not going to move to a system that does not allow them to play their sports games, that does not allow them to play their Call of Duties and their Fortnites, because those are the games that they play. Those are the reasons they own a PS5. I have met so many people who only own a PS5 so that they can play Call of Duty. And to not be able to play Call of Duty on this box means that it is not even remotely designed to achieve the same level of mass market appeal as a Call of Duty machine, essentially, right? Not to say that Call of Duty and PC gaming don't have, like, their extremely deep ties, but on a foundational level with this, out of the box, to get the appeal of that console, like, it just works element, this isn't a PC, it is a Linux machine. It's not going to run Windows originally. That will require extra legwork and technical know-how from the purchaser that the general console market does not have any interest in learning or implementing. So, yeah, the kernel level anti-cheat Linux stuff is going to end up being a huge barrier that at all levels will stop the Steam machine or a Steam Deck or anything like this from completely overtaking the market, just because it foundationally doesn't work with some of the most popular games out there. And I think that, of course, then ties back into a lot of the stuff we've been talking about with how do we distribute this thing? Because I think if Valve had an argument that they had cracked PC power in a console form factor and ease of use combo, they might have had a different strategy to just completely blow the market up, right? They probably would be selling on Amazon. They probably would be selling in Target and Walmart and Best Buy. But they know that their addressable market is limited in no small part by that Linux element. So I think that is a worthwhile point to bring up.
Yeah, I'd say that when this thing comes out, I'd feel pretty confident that it's going to be a thing where we know someone with a Steam machine, similar to how we know someone that has a Steam, or a lot of people know someone that has a Steam Deck. Like, I think this thing will be popular enough that you will see it around, and it may pull people in when they see how much people like it. Like, the people that buy this thing, I think, are going to like it a lot, and there probably is going to be a lot of people that, you know, there probably are going to be a lot of people that see someone else enjoy this thing so much, and they're like, you know what? I think I'm going to get one of those too, because, you know, of all the convenience that it provides when it comes to PC gaming. And just like the portability, I just don't think we can fully understand until it comes out the benefit of how everything just working and like ease of use is, because so much of what's a pain with PC is like worrying about whether your parts work together or whether it's gonna break randomly because your RAM is corrupted because it's all from a different vendor. Like, there's so many things that are just easier buying a pre-built machine, and it looks like this will be one of the best space efficient pre-built machines that will be on the market for that price point, certainly. I would also just say, with the Fortnite, COD, all these big games that are like big system sellers that need the anti-cheat, that might stop mattering so much, because we are getting closer and closer to a world where the bigger and bigger releases are ones that have nothing to do with games as a service. So as an example, there was Schedule 1 earlier this year, Peak came out this year, there was Blueprints this year, there was Dispatch this year, which we just talked about. I'm listing off all these games because these are all, I actually don't know if Dispatch was a PC exclusive, but a lot of these were PC exclusive games that sold gangbusters and are driving the games industry. AAA is becoming increasingly more kind of in its own little segment of the industry, where most AAA games suck and people don't really respect AAA in the way that they used to when Aaron and I were growing up. And I think the more that happens, the better the Steam Deck looks, because a lot of these games that are indies are coming out first on PC, and they may never come to console because there's a long process trying to become certified on a platform. Yeah. And until you become this like mega hit, Sony, Microsoft, Nintendo, they don't give a shit. They have departments that do focus on indie games, but it's not until you start showing them that you can make money that they start caring about helping you port something. Yeah. That's the reality for the vast majority of creators. You're going to get way more solid day one content, I think, on the Steam Deck than a lot of consoles in the coming years, just based on what we've been seeing.
No, I actually completely agree with you, with one minor asterisk. If you look at the nature of exclusive titles across platforms, obviously Xbox has thrown the concept out entirely. Sony is releasing more and more of their games on PC, specifically on Steam, just to broaden their market. But
which don't need anti-cheat. I just want to mention, do not need anti-cheat, so you can play all your God of War, etc. Anyway, sorry.
Yes, fair. But a lot of them may still require PSN access in a lot of cases, which does limit like global reach depending on the title. But the reality is that the PC gaming market has the most exclusives, and it's not even close. Because so many of those indie games, those smash hit indie games, do come out exclusively on PC because it's a lower barrier to entry for the developers, which means that you have this thriving indie scene where games from completely unknowns can come out and sell a gajillion copies and become enormous sensational success stories that people resonate with and want to play. And I think that there is a huge market for that, especially when you throw back in those PlayStation exclusives in games like Clair Obscur and other, various different cross-platform hits, right? Like, I don't think you can reasonably make the argument that the value proposition of moving to PC gaming is terrible on a games basis, right? The games are absolutely there, and the price point for them is often better than it would be on any other console because of Steam sales. And then you factor in the free online component for the games that do work with online, which is most of them. So yeah, 100%. There's a great market there, and the rise of AA and indie games in every space is definitely a huge benefit to PC and PC to it. The only caveat there being that the markets, like the market segment of people who buy a PlayStation just so that they can play the newest Call of Duty and FIFA games, are not the same people who will have even heard of Blueprints. They're two different worlds of audience. It's the difference between trying to describe Begonia and Fantastic Four, right? The target audiences are going to be fairly distinct between those two things. And the people who want a machine that plays Call of Duty just want a machine that plays Call of Duty. They're really not going to be considering the ecosystem of, slipping AAA quality, rising AAA costs, lack of innovation across the board. Fortnite still makes a ton of money, Call of Duty still makes a ton of money, and the audiences for those games are so entrenched in the world of those games that any machine that can't play those games is just not going to be something they want to buy. That's just my opinion on it. But I think for everybody else, I think the Steam Deck kicks ass. I love that thing. It has been my portal back into PC gaming since my PC is out of date and I'm far too broke to afford to build a new one at the moment. But the thing just works. It has its quirks, but by and large, the machine is reliable. It's performant. It keeps up with most everything that I've thrown at it. And the form factor is great, and I can't complain about much of anything to do with the Steam Deck. So in some ways, the Steam machine is for me. And I do think that people's relationship with the machine will be very similar to that of the Steam Deck, where there will be a great many enthusiasts all sort of sharing their love for it, but it won't be something where everyone has one. I think you're completely spot on with that. But, the big takeaway for me, though, is that the Steam machine does not have to be a console killer. It doesn't have to ship 10 million or even 8, 7, 6 million units for it to be considered a success by Valve. And arguably, the industry at large, depending on what moves the other hardware manufacturers make in response to the success or, failure of the Steam machine.
Yeah, I mean, I I think in closing for me, I mean, one, I think you bring up a good point. The Steam Machine may honestly be a great transition point for people that have the Steam Deck because it will be more performant in general. It won't have the battery life issues. It will expand upon presumably the Steam library that maybe you start to build if you start gaming on a Steam Deck. So I think that's actually a really good point of it's kind of like the next natural upgrade to expanding on people that like the Steam Deck and see the benefit of it and then PC gaming as a whole. So good call out with that. I hadn't actually thought through that one. Outside of that, I would just like to say, I think this will be successful from Valve's perspective. Will it sell over 10 million units in the first 4 years? Maybe not even, but I think it's going to achieve the goals that Valve want it to, and I think it positions them to, at some point, potentially make an even more compelling, perhaps console-focused offering in the future. The other thing to keep in mind, too, is hopefully once AI calms down and a lot of the hardware associated with consoles and PCs starts to cool, this thing could get quite a bit cheaper. Maybe even to the $600 range. And if it can get to the $600 range and Valve is willing to sell it at that and they're still making a profit, that becomes a much more competitive offering even against normal consoles. So,
oh god, yeah.
I do think I think Xbox certainly needs to pay attention. There's a real threat to Windows in the gaming space from Steam. Nintendo is doing its own thing as always and is immune to everything.
Yes.
And PlayStation, it'll be interesting to see what PlayStation does. I will say if they stop making exclusives go to PC, I think that shows us that PlayStation is at least somewhat concerned about Steam and their ability to steal business in the future.
Yeah.
We will see what happens there.
Yeah, completely agree. The people who should be on the closest lookout right now are people at Microsoft, candidly. Just because, again, their operating system is being threatened for dominance in the gaming space. For the longest time, Linux gaming was very fringe. It wasn't necessarily mocked or derided on the same level as like Apple gaming, but it certainly wasn't, at the forefront of PC culture. And right now, PC gaming culture is awash with news about Linux just because it is becoming so good for that purpose. So Windows, both in terms of them completely hucking their console identity out the window and losing traction with players on the basis of the strength of SteamOS, they need to be concerned on multiple fronts. Whatever box they release next, especially if it is something closer to a PC console hybrid, it now needs to compete directly with the Steam Deck, and they will have distribution on their side and branding on their side, but they might not have performance on their side. And if they don't have access to a Steam library on their hardware, they will lose out on the PC market for that PC console hybrid. So yeah, they have to keep a close eye on what they're doing. Nintendo doesn't need to give a shit. And right now, PlayStation is basically the only console in the console war. It's a high-end machine that does what it needs to do. But the biggest concern for them will be software sales. How much do they need to be concerned about Steam as a storefront competitor? But also, if the Steam Deck does find a foothold in the market, it will be interesting to see how hardware expectations change among mainstream gamers. Because that will be when Sony starts to take notice, right? If console sales take a $5 million chip out of, not $5 million, sorry, a 5 million unit chip out of Sony's, ambitions, they'll notice that, but not necessarily care if it's not playing to the same core audience. But if it balloons in popularity, if the prices go down and the sales go up, then yeah, it could end up being long-term very disruptive. In the short term, I have a feeling that it's mostly a curio that will appeal to a core audience that has every potential to grow. But yeah, we're not going to be seeing any dethronings or anything like that in the near future. I sincerely doubt. I think the console market, insofar as anyone can claim it is currently stable, will remain largely stable after the launch of the Steam machine. But it'll be very interesting to see where this thing goes, because it seems like a much better direction than the original Steam machines back in like the 2010s and whatnot. This seems like a much better thought out system with a much better OS to back it up. So yeah, it could be the start of something big.
Yep. Yeah, we'll see when it ends up coming out what all happens, but it's certainly been something that is a hubbub in the gaming space, so we wanted to make sure to at least cover it to some degree. Hopefully we did an adequate job. Like I said, give us your thoughts on anything that we've talked about. Are you going to buy one? How expensive is too expensive? Do you think it's going to fail? We would love to hear from all of you. And if you're good to go into thank yous, Aaron, I think I am good to do so.
Yeah, I'm definitely good to go into thank yous. And in fact, I would like to thank Beach Girl, if that's quite all right with you, Zach.
No.
Oh, okay.
Contractually, you can't.
Damn.
Please stop.
Well, I'm gonna break with the law, down with the regulations. No, a huge thank you to Beach Girl. They are the provider of our wonderful intro and outro music. Arguably the most sonically pleasant part of the editing process for me. Someone who, by the time that gets put in, has had to listen to my own voice for a shamefully long time. So a personal thank you to Beach Girl for that respite, but a larger thank you to them for the great music. And if you would like to hear more of what they have done, you can still find some of their music around under the Beach Girl moniker, but also there is more music coming out with the group Electric Guitar, which is another name that they've performed under. So feel free to check those out on SoundCloud, Bandcamp, Spotify, wherever you can find it. Try to do so and go ahead and give it a listen. You won't regret it.
And I would just like to do a quick thank you to Mosscat Market that helped us with our art and our original logo. Definitely appreciate the work that she put in. Unfortunately, there's no easy way to give Mosscat Market money, so just follow them on Instagram. I believe that is the one platform that they're still live on. Mosscat Market, we're still trying to support you financially. You're making it hard, too, when you don't have ways to let people pay you.
Start a Patreon.
Yeah, start a Patreon or something. Come on, what are you doing? With that, though, I think I'm all good. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. We appreciate all of you. Have a good rest of your day. Goodbye.
Indeed.
Goodbye. Mama, I'm going to go out into the woods and find a porn magazine, a Playboy.